was certainly some spinning that it was a big success. I think I'll just go through a presentation that gives you a sense that while it was certainly not a success, there is reason to believe that we have some progress that otherwise wouldn't have occurred unless, well, it actually was a joint effort, but the U.S. actually played a very significant role. I would say that before we even got to Copenhagen, the trajectory we were on was that there was not going to be a binding agreement coming out of Copenhagen because the U.S. Senate had failed to act, and so the long stall by the U.S. Congress to actually get in the game has continued to be a huge cost. Next slide. So let me just back up for a second to talk about Sierra Club and our involvement. International work has been a relatively minor part of our work at the national conservation level. We did have a delegation in Montreal, but that's because Montreal is a lot closer than some of the other venues. So, but we have had some of our lead activists involved, but it just hasn't become a major priority until now. And the Sierra Club has now launched what we're calling the Climate Recovery conservation campaigns, and these really focus on both mitigation, which is arresting greenhouse gas emissions, and adaptation, which is helping natural systems and communities build resilience to the climate change impacts that are here now or coming. And and from our perspective and what informs our work at the national level is that no matter what you're working on, climate change impacts are going to have be a major factor. So we've stepped up our focus on international work, and we're seeing it as very closely linked to U.S. policy domestically. And the sense is that we need to exert leadership overseas in a way that we've not done for too long, and that a very important factor is that if the U.S. doesn't begin to make up for lost time in terms of launching its own clean energy initiatives, we're going to lose ground to our trading partners. We did have a delegation of 48 people in Copenhagen. Most of them were volunteers. We had 6 staff people, and I should hasten to add, for those that are worried about our budget, that all of the volunteers paid for most of their travel and expenses there. A number of them reached out to their chapters for some support, and we did support some of our students. We had around 20 students, which was really wonderful. They were great and sort of kept us energetic and vigorous. I should just mention that in general, Sierra Club has been part of the Climate Action Network over the years, and it's a strong alliance that we have. The Climate Action Network is it's a global network of organizations, all and non-governmental organizations from all 6 continents, and the leading environmental organizations in the U.S. are members of it, and it's a great way to pool resources. Sierra Club is one of the leading organizations in the U.S. Climate Action Network, which is part of this larger group. So I wanted to just flag that for you. There's a very useful document put out by the Climate Action Network, the U.S. Climate Action Network, which is called Climate Negotiations, and this is just a real primer on all the whole structure of the negotiations, what went on, and a lot of the issues teed up for Copenhagen. I'm going to pass this. You can, next slide, Bill.
Are those available?
This is available on the Climate Action Network website, so I highly recommend it if you want to really get into the weeds. I'm just going to pass this around. One of the very confusing things for those of us like me who's a complete neophyte is that the climate negotiations, this is a diagram about what I'm going to talk about, if you want to just pass that around. The climate negotiations are on 2 parallel tracks, one being the Kyoto Protocol, which was adopted in 1997 and was the first step in terms of getting developed countries to commit to reduce their greenhouse gas emissions. It was launched in 2005, and as everybody is very well aware, the U.S. failed to sign on, and we are one of the few countries. There are some other developing countries that have not signed on. But the significance of the Kyoto Protocol is that it is the only binding international agreement committing developed countries to reduce their greenhouse gas emissions. A comprehensive treaty is that will address the need for action on the part of developing countries is something that we haven't got in place yet, and that's the other track that we were trying to move towards in Copenhagen. In 2007 in Bali, there were meetings that were designed to put forward the principles for a comprehensive treaty, and basically the underlying principle of most importance is shared responsibility and common but differentiated responsibilities for the parties. So the thinking is that there's a need to recognize the historical responsibility of the developed countries in creating this huge problem, and we have the pressures on us to reduce our emissions drastically, but we are not going to be able to solve the problem without getting developing countries to step up. And so even as they are pursuing development, we need to get them to take actions to contribute to solving the problem. So that's a broader treaty. The focus is as much on adaptation and funding for developing countries, to help them build capacity to, develop a sustainable economy, and also to adapt to climate change. All of this was in the works. There were texts being developed since Bali, and over the course of 2009, there were a number of meetings of the working parties developing these texts for the countries, and there was not sufficient movement over the course of the year to tee these up, and that's largely as a result of U.S. intransigence. So things were stalled before we got to Copenhagen. Next slide. So the scene there, Dick described the outside. It was just as chaotic inside the Bella Center. 193 nations, and all of their agendas, individual national agendas, were represented along with them, and it affected the whole tenor of the discussions. The UN had done a very poor job of anticipating what the space was going, how the space was going to work, and they over-registered by, they doubled the registration they should have taken in. So what ended up happening, the reason that all of the, or most of the non-governmental organization members were excluded at the end of the talks was because the heads of state came to town, 100 of them, or actually more than 100, and that was not at all anticipated with all the security that added to the situation, and so it was just a complete mess. They hadn't done a good job of anticipating how long it would take to do the security for all of these people coming in, and so delegates were standing in the cold for hours and not able to get into their meetings, and it was pretty much a mess. The NGOs, we had all of the diversity that Dick described outside was also inside, and there were spontaneous demonstrations. There was a whole series of side events, tutorials on, you name it, local activity and biofuel production and issues to do with agriculture and trade and renewable energy, all going on. And then the negotiations were going on in a separate part of the Bella Center.